If you guys aren't aware, obviously Rising on the Hill has continued despite Crystal Ball and Sagar and Jetty's pretty, infamous exit that happened, several months ago now, and they started breaking points. And now it's just Ryan Grimm, Emily Jasinski sometimes, often Kim Iversen. This is going to be a really fascinating clip to dissect. And I was honestly shocked by how tense it actually got on the Rising set here in this clip we're about to play. It really, my mouth honestly hit the floor. My jaw hit the floor. I was really shocked by just how kind of awkward and tense this clip is. So this is an interesting Rising segment. Definitely the most intense I've seen in a while. And just for some context, this was on Kim Iversen's radar from October 7th. Is the military industrial complex teeing up World War III with China Taiwan conflict? And again, her radar is maybe 5 or 6 minutes. I overall thought the radar was actually pretty reasonable. I think she was for the most part getting at some very accurate stuff as far as how the military industrial complex is most definitely undeniably escalating with China right now. And that, very likely could lead to World War III. It may sound ridiculous, but it's really not. The nuclear destruction clock is at midnight, essentially. And a world war with China and the U.S. would absolutely probably trigger that. So, this is serious stuff. It's not just like hyperbole or exaggeration. No, this is something that we should all be genuinely terrified of, regardless of how we feel about Taiwan or anything like that. This is certainly something that we all need to be concerned about and monitoring. So, with that being said, let's take a look at this. We don't have to watch the entire radar. We can just watch the last, couple minutes of the radar and then get into the very tense exchange that occurred right after she finished. And Ryan chimes in, and so does Emily Jasinski, who was there on the panel as well. So yeah, this is really intense, guys. Gonna be fascinated to hear your opinion, Zach, and you guys in the chat as well.
Claims that China is ramping up aggressions by flying its jets in Taiwan's airspace. Take a look at this map. The orange lines are the Chinese flights Taiwan is talking about. The light blue shaded area around Taiwan is their actual airspace. And as you can see, the orange lines are not in that shaded area. So what are all of these reports referring to? Well, they're referring to an area titled the ADIZ, the Air Defense Identification Zone, and that zone is the blue dotted line that creates this rectangle, much of which actually goes right over mainland China. You can see that. The ADIZ zone was created by the U.S., actually, and is not internationally recognized as actual airspace. And the point of this drawn zone is to allow countries the right to monitor all aircraft in the area to catch unwanted threats that may head toward the country. And with Taiwan's ADIZ encompassing much of mainland China itself, they could claim hundreds of flights are in their air zone each day. But you can see from this map that China has not entered Taiwan's actual airspace. Now, once again, China is an economic competitor. They are not faultless, and they definitely are doing things to try to undercut and weaken us through IP theft and currency manipulation. And we need to aggressively counter China, but we need to be smarter about it and counter through competition, not through debilitation. They are playing a strategic game of Go, while we're playing a guessing game of Battleship. It's only going to result in us spending gobs of money, making the military-industrial complex wealthier, while we, the American people, are told we can't use our tax dollars for things like universal pre-K, healthcare, or college because we can't afford it. Well, we can afford it if we stop these endless warmongering. We just ended one war weeks ago. The last thing we need to do is ramp up a Cold War with a behemoth that ends up costing us many times more. But the media, the war hawks, and the war lobby are already greasing the wheels for more war while manipulating us into going along with it. Curious your take on this, both Emily and Ryan. What are you thinking about this ramped up rhetoric with China? Curious, Emily, do you think China's an actual, foe that we need to maybe flex our military muscle?
Look at their faces, by the way. Emily's like not amused by this at all.
This freeze frame is hilarious, actually. Oh my gosh, it's like Ryan finding his inner zen. It's like, Gavin always, I don't know if I should Gavin always jokes that Ryan Grimm has such like dad features, right? That it's almost like he's ready to give his like child a lecture, right? Like, okay, you've just said a bunch of shit that I really disagree with. Now I'm about to find my inner zen. Emily Jasinski just looks pissed off. She's got a mean mug on her face. She's ready to go to the mat. So yeah, this will be an interesting WWE style internet political brawl.
against?
Well, so flexing our military muscles, I guess, is a different question. And that's kind of exactly what my response is, in that two things can be true at the same time. It is true that the military-industrial complex can be using the disgusting human rights abuses that the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government is committing for their own ends, because they're hawkish and they're hungry. And I think you do see that absolutely in the rhetoric surrounding Taiwan. That is completely true. I think it is also true that China is provoking countries that are defenders of freedom, and I think there's no equivocation. There's no equivalence between what China is doing, which is ethnic cleansing of Uyghur Muslims, and that is, BuzzFeed News has incredible reporting on that. We've interviewed people who have come out of the camps in Xinjiang.
Didn't BuzzFeed publish the Steele dossier or something too? Just saying, but. Overall, just to break in real quick, I do think that Emily, while I disagree with her on a lot and, some of her tone here, I do think she does say something which is somewhat important here and that often gets lost in this very unnuanced conversation, which is that two things can be true at once. So, it is true and it can be true that, China is an authoritarian country. And despite the fact that in certain areas it is much better than the U.S., it undeniably also is authoritarian and totalitarian in other aspects, and that is true. But also, what is true is that the U.S. is, often pointing to their abuses and in some cases exaggerating their abuses in order to indeed escalate militarily. So I think just before we get any further into that, I do kind of agree with that sentiment that, yeah, two things can be true at once, and there's a lot of players on both sides of this debate that like to, make it so that only one thing is true and only their side is correct and everyone else is a propagandist or whatever. So that's important to say.
It is ethnic cleansing. There are reports of forced sterilization. There are people who say they have endured forced sterilization. This is a grave human rights abuse on a scale that is far greater than problems with our own prisons, which do exist. And so I think two things can be true. And so I absolutely agree with that instinct for nuance. And I do think that hawks are exploiting some of that to ramp up, perhaps to whet our appetites for a military conflict with China 100%.
Yeah. And I think what's happening in Xinjiang is maybe easier to be understood as a cultural genocide. There's a real effort to just completely wipe away the culture that has been there for hundreds of years. And I don't think it's accurate to refer to them as kind of another version of a mujahideen. And I kind of object to this idea that exists a lot online, that if you criticize China or anything that the Chinese government has done, then you are necessarily calling for war, or you are supporting the war effort. It's not only do I think that there's no logical connection between those two things, I actually think it's a little bit naive, because underlying it is the assumption that if you don't participate in these criticisms of cultural genocide going on among the Uyghur population, then the war hawks won't wage war on China. But that's absurd. There are structural forces and there are entire industries that are pushing in that direction, completely regardless of whether or not you voice accurate criticisms of what the Chinese government is doing. And I think Emily said it well, that both things can be true at once. And so, I don't think we should shrink from our obligation to be critical of human rights abuses that are happening anywhere on the globe.
Well, interestingly,
can I jump in here? Yeah, I don't disagree with everything with a lot of what Ryan Grimm said there. Actually, I think that Gavin and I have articulated some of our own criticisms of China, but we would actually you'd have to be an absolute fool to be interested in getting into any kind of war with China. Gavin and I are opposed to the new Cold War that we've already been entrenched with in China, which is going to be fought mostly through proxy shadow wars. In Africa, that's going to persist. We've read the Adrian Zen's reporting. We understand that there's a lot of shaky ground that the Uyghur genocide has been, portrayed under. Likely, from what I can gather is that there was in the same way that the United States had a response to 9/11 in which we stripped away a shit ton of people's rights, right? The Patriot Act, and we started spying on Muslims domestically. We did it we did it in New York City famously. We've done it all over the country. We've done it abroad as well. The same thing happened in China, right? They did a massive crackdown on Muslims. They were trying to stop any kind of terror activity, and they definitely violated people's human rights, just like the United States violated people's human rights, right? And like Ryan was saying, both of those things can be true. Now, I don't think this is exactly how Ryan Grimm was framing it. This is how I'm framing it, but I'm just saying, I think he's right in saying that, you can have criticisms of China, right? I think I am critical of how they've treated the Muslim population in China. I don't think many people would sign up to go and get the treatment that you get if you're a Uyghur in China and Xinjiang. I just don't think that's the kind of ethical globe that we're shooting for. And so, of course, I have criticisms of that. But obviously, you can also be aware that the only reason that this is getting picked up and being spread like wildfire is because the United States media and the United States military racket, the military industrial complex, stands to benefit from this. And I think that there are plenty of people in this country, on the internet, whatever you want to say, that are capable of understanding both of those things to be true, right? And so when people say cultural genocide, I think a lot of times what they're really trying to do is they're trying to keep that buzzword genocide attached to it so that they don't look completely silly for having called it an actual genocide when there was really no evidence for that, besides, like people have noted, it's a religious nut, Adrian Zenzi, or however the fuck you pronounce that guy's name. But I do think it's also true, and we've talked to people even like Max Blumenthal when he told us that it was very similar to a crackdown that the United States did against the Muslim populations here. Likely, they probably went further in China domestically than we went here. They have no, President Xi Jinping is a fucking authoritarian, right? He doesn't get reelected. He does not have to be voted in by the Chinese people, so they can typically get away with more. Although at the same point, yes, the United States does have a fucking permanent infrastructure that continues to wreak chaos throughout the world. So it's like you can be critical of both empires, because I think it's safe to say that China is an empire and so is the United States.
Yeah, 100%. And I also think it's very fair to point out that, even if everything that has been said is going on in China is accurate, even if everything that has been said is accurate, that obviously the U.S. is not, really truly pointing this stuff out for humanitarian reasons, as it's been, obviously noted by us here many times. We are carrying out many human rights abuses around the world, either directly or indirectly, like, for example, the funding of the, the genocide in Yemen that's going on at the behest of Saudi Arabia with our money. So, it's not like
or just rapidly funding Israel.
Yeah, or rapidly funding Israel. Exactly. So the U.S. is far from innocent in this regard. And like I said, even if you grant that everything happening in China is happening, which I'm not necessarily prepared to grant, even if you do grant that, then you still have to reckon with why it's being talked about by the U.S. so much, why they're drawing so much attention to it, when, again, there's plenty of human rights issues going on around the world, including many by our own making. So that would, of course, lead you to believe that the United States wants to draw attention to this in order to justify military escalation, which, as I said, could lead to World War III, something that we don't want to, find ourselves in. So, I think that there's a lot of, good points being made across the board here, but it does get a little bit more intense, and we're going to have some more to talk about. So let's keep playing this, because like I said, this is really intense.
Every Muslim country minus Turkey, I believe, actually is in alignment with China.
I don't want to hear from the United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia on human rights. I just don't care what they have to say.
No, but I mean, regarding whether or not there's
rights.
There's an actual ethnic cleansing going on against Muslims in China.
They have their own geopolitical reasons, and pointing to the.
I would say that, it's not like the U.S. really has much room to talk either, as a country that also commits massive amounts of human rights. So, that is what it is too. But yeah.
The idea that, well, these people are Muslims and they say nothing bad is happening there is just not a serious inquiry into what's actually happening, when we can talk to people who escaped from it.
Yeah, they've been. Yeah,
sure.
I guess
they're separatists. There is definitely a separatist movement, so you're going to get two sides of a story for sure. You're going to get people that absolutely want to break away from China. They want their own place. And so I think that right now it's way too early for anybody to make any sort of claims. I
think it's way too late. It's way too late. There was a separatist movement, and it was quite effectively smashed with incredibly brutal tactics, and there's nothing wrong with just saying that.
But that's
doesn't mean we need to go
case.
to war over it.
Right, that's another case of both things being true, right? Like it can be true that there was a separatist movement that was then smashed by authoritarian, culturally genocidal, and wildly abusive tactics by the CCP.
Right, and you just thoroughly lose all your credibility if you deny it.
Again, pausing that, during the U.S. war on terror, we built Abu Ghraib. We built black sites all over the world that we were torturing people in, violating their human rights in the most blatant, just horrifying ways. I just heard John Kiriakou describe the fucking experience of one guy who literally had his eye removed without his consent at a black site. You know, things like that. Those are violations of human rights too. So, you know, I think it would be just as fair to say, I don't want to hear what any American has to say about human rights violations. If you're going to go that route, that you have to go that route. You have to be like, hey, if you're a human rights violator, I don't want to hear from you, which means that, you know, you're going to have to find a fucking different country than the United States to answer your questions too, which is why I think that, you know, Ryan kind of backed himself into a corner there. That was not necessarily the route that I would go. You know, considering there, you know, another way to kind of poke holes in that is to be like, you know, Saudi Arabia is allied with the United States, the biggest funder of Israel, who's destroying the shit out of Palestine. Okay, a lot of Muslims take that issue really seriously, or people of the Islamic faith take that issue really seriously, right? Geopolitically, I'm not talking about domestically in America, I'm just talking about worldwide. So you could just as easily point to that and be like, oh, see, like, you know, there's no problems going on in Palestine, otherwise Saudi Arabia would be speaking up about it. So I just think that's a really bad point.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. And when it comes to the media's coverage of the issue, I mean, it just has to be said that the media has this, you know, massive history of printing lies for the military industrial complex, for the state, essentially just printing whatever the CIA or the Pentagon tells them to, you know, without question, without further investigation. So you know, I do think there's very legitimate reasons why people are casting doubt on some of the reports being printed by these mainstream outlets about what's going on in aspects of China. But again, on the other hand, I do think it's totally fair to acknowledge that there are human rights abuses going on in China. It really is one of those tricky issues where, for one, it's tough to know what to believe because, again, we've been lied to so many times by the media. And like Ryan said, you know, all these different countries, including our own, have very specific geopolitical reasons for saying what they say and trying to appease China or trying to escalate with China. It's all very muddy. It's all very tough to discern what is the truth and what we should be, you know, actually taking as accurate information. But that being said, let's keep watching this because it keeps going.
I don't agree with that. I think it's the other way around, actually.
Okay.
But you know,
I guess one question is, what scale of what scale do you think that the CCP is abusing Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang?
I'm sure that the scale, I'd say it's very similar to what we do here in the United States when it comes to Patriot Act and carting people off to Guantanamo Bay. I'm sure it's a very.
But we don't put an entire people in camps based on their religious identity.
I think
Guantanamo Bay has Guantanamo at this point is dozens of people.
Right, but you cannot make the claim by any stretch of any imagination that all of the Uyghurs are suddenly disappearing into these camps. If you go to Xinjiang, they're there.
No,
they see them.
They aren't. No, they aren't. But this is a very real fear of the Uyghur people in Xinjiang. Right. First of all, we can't. We do have satellite images, and we have the testimony of people who have escaped the camps. And you know, the relatives, and there's corroborating evidence here. And all of the other countries have reason to defend China because they're in bed with China for economic reasons and the way that China supports their economy.
Just like everybody's in bed with the United States on the other side of the table. I just want to be fair.
And will support their economy. But I will say, I think, you know, the reality that people are being put in camps based on their identities, it's not every Uyghur Muslim.
Also a reminder that the U.S. is the world's most incarcerated country, so.
But it is a huge chunk of the Uyghur Muslims that have at least gone through them and cycled through them and maybe have been released. But at the same time, there's this.
And also, admittedly, this was a while ago, but we have fucking rounded up people and incarcerated them all and thrown them into camps because of their race. And one of the most progressive presidents fucking ever did that shit. His name was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Okay, we interned the Japanese community in this country. So to act like this is something that's like so fucking outside, like this was after, you know, or during World War II, right? You know, during the after bombing of World Harbor, right? World War II technically already started overseas, right? So, but anyway, fucking. I'm just saying, right? Like, just to provide some historical fucking clarification. Obviously, both of those things are fucking wrong if they're happening, right? I think that that's absolutely clear. And I think that a lot of what happened, if we're trying to like really piece through what they're talking about, I would imagine that a lot of it went down to, yes, there was a separatist movement in China. It was brutally crushed, just like they would crush a fucking separatist movement in the United States. Don't fucking kid yourself. Like people were, being like, Zach fucking doesn't understand what he's talking about with Taiwan. Like, would Zach support Alaska fucking seceding from the United States? Like, do you think that for a goddamn second that if the indigenous people of fucking Alaska tried to secede, that wouldn't be at least the morally correct thing to do? So it's like, you can understand that things aren't practical, but are morally correct. And I'll still like voice my support for them. This is one of those examples. It's like, okay, nobody's saying that if they interned the separatist movement in China, that we should get any way involved as the United States. But I'm also not going to bite my tongue as somebody who comments on this geopolitically. I will both say in the same breath, fuck what China is doing. It has no concern to us militarily, as far as I'm concerned, right? We need to move our ships out. We need to demilitarize. We need to focus on what the fuck we're doing domestically, because we cannot be the world police. We've proven that time and time again. We didn't clean up any of the places we've gone before. We've only made it worse. And this time it would certainly kill us all. That's all true. But I'm not going to fucking pretend that another country that has fucking authoritarian rule over its people isn't fucking shit up and making life hard for people that, they want to.
Enormous fear. You have members of the CCP going into their homes. It's just an incredible invasion of privacy and of freedom. And I don't think there's any equivalence.
They're literally not allowed to practice their religion. They're literally
not allowed to practice Salafist Wahhabism. That is absolutely correct. They're not allowed to practice Salafist Sunni Islam, which is the more radical version. That is what China has banned. That is true. So even if a person's not a criminal,
what is this? What is going on here? There's no. Do you think that there's some other mosque that they're able to attend? Like, what are you talking about?
Muslims in China. I mean, there's
a Chinese government. There's one Chinese government sanctioned mosque that they're allowed to attend, and therefore there's no cultural genocide going on.
Salafist. Yes, it's banned to practice Salafist.
I would encourage you to read some of the dispatches, from people who have experienced this.
Extensive research,
and not through the prism of testimony.
Some of it, but not all of it. No, I do think that there's definitely, like I mentioned, human rights abuses going on for sure. I mean, it's prison. It's like Guantanamo Bay. There's definitely stuff going on that shouldn't be going on. But to call it an ethnic genocide is what I take issue with specifically, and I think that's warmongering language.
So if you compare what the culture was,
this really quick. Just to concede that to Kim Iversen, I do think she's right there. The reason that they leaned into the ethnic cleansing language is because they were trying to warmonger. They wanted a fucking reason to go. That we always look for humanitarian cover before we go in. It's either the women, the children, the poor Kurds that we don't ever give a shit about and we sell out immediately. That is the pretense that we always go into war with. And 100%, and that's why the AP is now walking back all this language, and it goes from an ethnic cleansing to a cultural genocide to scattered human rights abuses, like a 1,000,000%. Yeah, see, so the barbed wire is almost gone. So are the armored personnel carriers. Young Uyghur men are back on the streets. Beijing is slackening its grip on Xinjiang after brutal mass detention campaign, but fear remains pervasive. Okay, so a lot of people are seeing this as like, yeah, see, we fucking told you that this isn't a fucking ethnic cleansing campaign. And a lot of this was surely hyped up by Washington. And like we mentioned, the Adrian Zenz report, which we covered on the Vanguard right after the Gray Zone published that article that brought it to most people's attention, right? So it's just, it's one of those things where definitely, as Kim just said, there are human rights abuses going on over there. That's 100% sure. China is doing bad shit. Like, I'm sorry to break the news to you that it's not a utopia over there, but it should have no bearing on whether or not we get involved militarily. And the shit where people are like, oh, China's flying through Taiwan's airspace, like all of that shit, not a fucking cause for us to militarily get involved. It's just not. I like solidarity to the people that are over there, fighting for themselves in Taiwan, if that's what they freely decide. Solidarity to the people in Hong Kong fighting for themselves, if that's what they fucking freely decide, without the corrupting influence of any outside power. But we have roads to fix here, man. We're not the world police. We'll fuck your shit up for you. Don't ask for our help. And we shouldn't fucking offer it help. More like us come and destroy your country and take all your resources. But
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And this is such a tricky issue, guys, because like obviously no one wants to be in the position of like quote unquote downplaying human rights atrocities where they may be occurring. I just think it's very important that we really take all this with a critical eye and really think about why it's being propagated by the U.S. media. Again, I think there's a really fine line here, and I think that the truth falls a little bit on both sides. This is one of those conversations that I find very frustrating, frankly, because it really does seem like everyone is either like 100% on China's side or 100% on the U.S.'s side, and they refuse to see the nuance here, and also just refuse to reckon with the fact that both of these are international superpowers that, of course, are going to be committing human rights atrocities. I mean, a lot of countries, most countries commit human rights atrocities, but when you talk about the big superpowers, of course they're going to be committing human rights atrocities. So I also don't agree with leftists who just outright refuse to criticize China at all. I think there's a lot of valid reasons to criticize China. Again, I just think we need to be critical about specifically what information we're being given to us by the mainstream media and why. Because again, like I said, the U.S. Exports human rights atrocity all around the world in so many ways: Israel, Palestine, Saudi Arabia's genocide in Yemen, et cetera, et cetera.
Africa, all of the entire continent.
Yeah, exactly. And also this notion that, there's no analogy to be made between the US's treatment of Muslim people and China's treatment of Muslim people. It's like, I was pretty young, but I remember the war on terror in the wake of 9/11. I remember my Muslim neighbor's door getting knocked on by like fucking FBI agents or whatever, random people being, imprisoned. I remember the insane, campaign against Islam that was taking place here in the United States domestically, but also abroad. We literally just ended a fucking war that started because ended, but yeah, we're still in the Middle East because of these wars and because of our war on terror supposedly in the wake of 9/11. So like, I don't necessarily agree with Ryan or Emily either that like, oh, how could you ever make that comparison? That's ridiculous. It's really not. We've done some fucked up shit here too to our Muslim American citizens, so I don't really get that either. But
extrajudicially murdered American citizens during the war on terror.
100%. But this does continue just for a few more minutes here. So let's take the rest of this in. Again, I can't believe how intense this conversation got.
To what it is today. Would you not acknowledge that they've obliterated the culture?
I would say the culture shifted. It became more.
That's a weird passive way to describe what happened. It didn't just passively shift. The Chinese government shifted it, right? By policy.
Some more radical religion kind of infiltrated, and we see this happening in lots of areas around the world, as we've seen.
Well, then why? Yes, there are radicals here in the United States. So does that justify like a massive crackdown sweeping up people?
Do you think that the Republican Party has changed? Do you think it's become more radical right wing? I mean, things changed.
I just don't think that's a productive, parallel. And it seems to me that we're not going to agree on the scale of the abuses. But I do think that we can agree that we can walk and chew gum at the same time, that there are different things going on. And that's that. I guess.
There were a handful of terrorist attacks.
Yes.
There are also terrorist attacks here in the United States. We would never say, okay, well then therefore we're going to ban the Christians.
And it's an ethnic, and it's on the basis of an ethnic identity. This is not just a religious identity, it's an ethnic identity.
Right.
Yeah.
It depends, right? But I don't agree that they're actually doing that. I think that
you just did agree to it. You said that you did agree that the culture that exists today is radically different as a result of Chinese policy.
It's been suppressed on a
No, I don't agree with that. That's not what I said. But I'll do a whole piece on the Uyghurs, and we can talk about this another time.
No, let's not actually do that. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much for watching. Yeah. We'll have more Rise coming up.
Yeah, that was awkward as fuck.
Yeah, I don't understand the impulse from Ryan at the end to be like, no, I don't want to actually have a full fleshed out discussion about this. That was one of my big critiques. I hate this fucking impulse that we just don't talk to people that we disagree with. Why not just have two competing radars one day where Ryan gives all of his fucking information. He makes his, 10, 15 minute spiel. And then they say, all right, Kim, what do you have on your radar today? And she's like, I have a different understanding of this issue. Let me lay out the best argument that I have. And then you let the viewer at home be like, damn, I just got to see both sides of this argument laid out in front of me by people who genuinely want to make it as compelling as possible. I will make up my own fucking mind, and that's how you do a good news show.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's very well said. I'm not really quite sure why Ryan Grimm did get so, I guess, triggered by Kim's input there. Not that I agree with everything Kim said, and I do certainly think that there were points of that exchange where she kind of dropped the ball as far as defending what she was saying, you know, like when she started to say that, yeah, the culture has shifted, and then they jumped on that and say, well, yeah, China shifted the culture. Yeah. So she kind of got herself in a bit of a gotcha there. So I see that. But like you said, Zach, I don't really think it was necessary to go down her throat like that, especially when, as I mentioned mere minutes ago, it's undeniable that the U.S. media has been complicit in warmongering escalation with other countries. I mean, we all remember WMDs. Think about how many times the media has carried water for the deep state and the Defense Department in order to further their agenda. So to act like this, you know, there's no potential or possibility of that going on here in this instance. While you simultaneously acknowledge the lies that were propagated about WMDs or, you know, other such things. I just think that's crazy because, again, of course, people are going to be skeptical. Of course, people are going to be a little bit suspicious when these kind of things get reported in tandem with military escalation with said country. It makes you wonder. So, again, I don't really understand the instinct to just shut down that line of thinking or to shut down that more cynical viewpoint.